Hi, everyone. I think we will get started. There may be a few folks who jump on the call in just a few minutes. So I'll start out with some introductions. My name is Liz Connor. I am the Capital Budget Coordinator here at MMB. Basically, I am your contact person for capital budget questions, and if there are questions that I don't know the answer to, I can get in touch with the experts who do. Today, I am joined by two of my colleagues. Yosef Al-Hajibi is going to be hosting the webinar. So if you've got any questions as we go along, please use the chat function available to you in WebEx on the right-hand side. Just note whatever questions you might have. If you've got questions that you can send via email, that's fine too. We'll try to address what we can. And to the extent that questions are system-related, process-related, I'll do my best to answer those questions. If you have questions about specific components of your project, for example, if there's going to be private use, what does it mean to have a grant agreement, how long money is available after it gets enacted in a bonding bill, I will probably turn to my colleague Trudy Halla, who is the Capital Bonding Coordinator. She works in our Debt Management Division. And so Trudy and I will work closely throughout the entire capital investment process, both before a bill gets enacted and after the bill gets enacted, to make sure that language in the bill is it's accurate, that the projects are described adequately so that there are no complications. If you're included in a bonding bill, actually getting that money out so that work can get started on the projects that you're requesting. So with that, I'll get started, and I first want to note something that hopefully you all have had a chance to take a quick look at. Our website, MMB's website, has a frequently asked questions section. You can navigate to it by clicking on the budget link, capital budget, and then there is a frequently asked questions, both for state agencies and local governments. The specific questions for local governments are here at the bottom of the page. While this is not a comprehensive list of questions and information, these are really the things that we encounter most frequently. A couple things that I'll just flag. Where can you find a list of bonding resources? For those of you who have questions about grant agreements, what does it mean that you need to work with a state agency to get that money? There are different resources that are available on the debt management portion of MMB's website. So I hope that you'll take a look through MMB's website and the resources that we have here if you've got questions that pop up throughout the process. And if it's not something you can easily find on our website, don't hesitate to give me a call or send me an email. The next thing I'll just note is I'll try to frame what it is that you're all working toward on Friday. So as you know, Friday is an important deadline for capital budget requests for the 2018 capital budget. Anything that you submit by Friday will be included in our preliminary transmittal to the legislature, both state agency projects and local government projects. This is the first time that they really become public, and these reports are used by legislators, the governor's office, other stakeholders to really get a sense of what is out there in terms of demand for capital investment. And these reports also inform the bonding tours that get scheduled throughout the summer. So many of you who have been part of the bonding process before, you've probably had some experience with some of these visits. So the information that you're submitting in the capital budget system will be published on July 17th. And I'll pull up a look at what was published 2 years ago in the 2016 capital budget in case you aren't familiar with what it is that we publish. So for local governments, it is a long list by entity. Each project gets listed along with the order of priority, the funding that's requested. The difference here is that for the 2018 capital budget, we'll see 2018, 2020, and 2022. At this stage, there are, of course, no recommendations by the governor yet, so this is just the universe of requests. So the table of contents lists local governments alphabetically, and then for each local government, the first report for projects is called the project summary. It's very high level. It's simply the name of the jurisdiction, the title of the project, the priority ranking. If there's more than one, you'd see that listed, the funding source that's requested for the project, and how much. And then the next report is the project narrative for that project. It's some of that same high-level information, the project summary, which is just a brief description, a couple sentences, the project description, which is a more lengthy explanation of what's entailed in the project, a project rationale, which explains why the project is necessary, why it's urgent, and then to the extent that there are other considerations, other state operating subsidy impacts that might occur as a result, some questions about public ownership, and a contact person for that project. And the final report that would be included with each request is the project detail. And that lists the funding sources requested for the project costs associated with your request, and then a statutory requirement screen. So within the capital budget system, there are a series of questions that you answer, whether or not certain requirements in state statute might apply to your request. Answer to the best of your ability in some cases. As you can see here, there are several things that didn't apply to this request. And the final question asks about a resolution of support from the governing body of the jurisdiction. And so that is the display for each request for each entity that will be published in July. July 17th is the date for that publication. So again, if you've got questions as we go, please use the chat function in WebEx, and we'll take a look at questions that come through. For now, what I want to do is just do a quick overview of the capital budget system and explain just at a high level what we're looking for in all of the screens that you have been busy completing in the last several weeks. So when you log in, the first thing you see is this home screen. And to start with, your first step is to create a request. The default year is 2018. You'll just want to make sure that you're in that year. You'll pick your local government jurisdiction. I'm just going to pick a test project. So what we would see here is the name of the project, a rank would be entered, and then the amount for 2018. The submission status by Friday, we'll need this to be in final submitted status. For now, what we'll do is go into each screen, and I'll give a quick explanation of the highlights. So hopefully that can confirm whether you're on the right track with the work that you're doing. So you'll recognize many of these fields from the report that we looked at, that sample report from our 2016 capital budget publication. It's the project rank, the location, the contact person associated with the project. The project summary is that brief description, the 2 to 3 sentences that really gets to the heart of what your request is. The project description, the project rationale, project timeline, these are all rich text fields, so you have the ability to do a bit of formatting to really to lay out in a clear way what your project is, why you're doing it, and why it's urgent, and how it will play out over the course of the next couple of years. The project timeline field, I'll just say a word about that. This is a new field for the 2018 process. It was added in response to legislators in particular asking for better information about why, or how I should say, a project would play out once it's enacted. Sometimes, over the course of, let's say, 2 to 3 years that a big project might take, it's tough to get a sense of the environmental studies, the engineering, the design, the construction and when the facility would be ready for occupancy. So ideally what we'd like to see here is sort of a bulleted list of really what the milestones are in your project. Any other considerations, anything that you feel is noteworthy that's not captured elsewhere in the project overview screen. And then there are a series of questions that really get to the public ownership test that is necessary for projects that receive general obligation bond funding. So for the most part, we expect that it is local governments who will own, operate, and use the facility and will be carrying out some sort of public program that there is authority to operate. To the extent that that is not the case, maybe you've got a nonprofit or somebody else who might be carrying out a program, this would be the place to flag those sorts of things. These are not necessarily deal breakers for your request, but they're really important for us to be aware of on the front end so that on Trudy's side of things, that we can be sure that we've got the necessary use agreements in place so that we don't have any complications with your project being funded if it's enacted in a bonding bill. Impact on state operating subsidies. If you have an impact to your jurisdiction's operating budget as a result of a new facility coming online, if you need to be requesting additional state support to operate the program, this would be where you would want to note that. The anticipated encumbrance date relates to when you would have assigned, when you're able to have a signed grant agreement in place with the state agency that would be acting as your fiscal agent. The anticipated midpoint of construction, what this really serves to do is to generate an inflation rate associated with your project. Based on the date that you select here, there will be a rate of inflation applied to your project. Now, some of you work with cost estimating firms and contractors who build that into the request already. And if that's the case, we do not want you entering a midpoint of construction because that would have the effect of adding on more inflation than what you've already got baked into your project. If that is the case, if you've already got inflation included, we would want you to check this box right here, and that will and not enter anything in the midpoint of construction selection, so we don't build in too much inflation. For local governments, this is a particularly important piece right here, the resolution of support. In some cases, governing bodies won't have a chance to approve a resolution by the June deadline, and that is fine. And if that is the case, what we would want you to do is to check no for that question. And then once you do have the resolution of support approved by your governing body, I'll just have you email it to me, and I can attach it in the system and make sure that we update the statutory requirements question that relates to this particular piece of your application. Otherwise, what you would do, if you do have it available, you'd want to click Add and then upload it here. So once you've completed these screens, the next screen you complete is the funding sources. For the most part, you'll be requesting general obligation bond funding. It's possible you might have general fund cash, depending on the type of project you have. There's other funding, appropriation bonds. Those are all other options. But for the most part, we see general obligation bonds as our primary source of funding. Then there are a couple of sections here that relate to your non-state match. There is state statute that assumes that local governments are bringing about 50% of the project cost to the table. And so this is where you'd reflect that portion of the project. So funds already committed is really your money in the bank. Maybe you've done some fundraising, you've already acquired land. You'd add that in this section right here. For the funds pending, this might be something like federal funds that you would count on once a request for state bond funding is approved. So not money in the bank, but money that you expect to come through if your project is included in a capital investment bill. Then based on what you enter in the funds committed and the funds pending, you're going to see some automatic calculations happen in this row, and that'll help MMB see the non-state share of the project if you're approaching 50% or more or less based on the money that you're bringing to the project. If there's any comments, any context of note, related to those funding sources. You can note that in these text fields right here. You'll also need to complete by Friday the project cost screen. So the first thing that you'll encounter, and I don't think we'll see it here because they've already been answered, there are 3 questions that really drive the level of detail that you'll need to provide. So if you're seeking a larger amount of funding, over $5 million, and if you're not working through a state grant program, chances are you will need to submit this detailed cost form, which really breaks out each category of spending in a more granular way. So you're not just talking about your design fees, you're talking about schematic design, design development, your contract documents, and so forth. To the extent something doesn't apply, you can just leave it blank. All of these totals that you add in will automatically be added down at the bottom. If you want to simplify the view that you've got, you can just click Hide Prior Years, and then you'll be looking just at the 6-year capital planning horizon. And then I'll just note that this, the inflation box, if you recall from the project overview screen, depending on what you had entered there, if you chose a midpoint of construction and if you did not have inflation included in your request, this is where it would be added on. If you had inflation already built in, if you checked that checkbox, you would not see this populated. You'd see zeros. To the extent that you can note an operating budget impact, FTEs, anything else, there is room for that here. And so the funding sources and the project costs, these are screens that get rolled up into that project detail report that we took a look at the beginning that shows a deeper dive into the numbers related to your project. Another piece that's included in that project detail report is the statutory requirements. Even though you all are not working at a state agency, there are still state agencies who you would have to work with if you were to receive bond funding. So there are several agencies that are part of the capital investment process. MNB, as you have probably learned, has a pretty significant role, as does the Department of Administration. So there are links to the statutes that are really at the heart of these questions. If you've got construction or major remodeling, pre-design, you'll have a chance to answer questions in a hopefully more informed way. This is just to help you understand what is this question really asking. So take a look at the statute, understand where the rationale for the question comes from, and hopefully that can inform the answer that you pick for these questions. We've also tried to build in a little bit of guidance in a way that helps you understand if you can choose not applicable or choose yes or no. For example, here, this question is required, or the answer is yes, only if your construction costs are over $750,000 for an agency or over $1.5 million for local government. So hopefully that saves some guesswork. And the other resource that we have here are some tooltips. So will a use agreement be required? Well, we can't tell you for sure without having further conversations about your project. This is a tool that can help you answer that question in a more informed way by understanding what types of situations would really give rise to the need for a use agreement. So all of these questions must be answered in order for your request to be considered complete. In this case, the upload document screen, this is an optional field. Your resolution of support, as you probably saw, was uploaded on the project overview screen. So here, this is really just an opportunity if you've got other documents that you think are to help bolster the case for your request, any sort of pictures or site maps, you can upload that here. And then once you've got all of your fields completed, you can go to Preview and Submit Request. This just gives you a look, a snapshot of everything that you've provided, all of the different screens. And then what you'll need to do is click Submit Request. You'll click Confirm, and One click gets you to a status of preliminary submitted. Local governments need to have their request in final submitted status, so what you're going to need to do is click this button a second time. And here you can see it's been updated to final submitted. So then to see if everything looks the way you expect, what's probably worth doing is before you actually get to that final sign-off point, is while your request is still in preliminary submitted status, what you can do is go to the reports, and you can generate a report that will look like the one that we saw right at the beginning of the webinar to see how your request will look when we publish in July. So what we'll do and what you can do is click on reports. I'm going to have a few more options than what you as local government officials are able to see. So it defaults to 2018. You'll want to pick your jurisdiction. We won't actually run this report since nothing is public yet. So what you'll want to do then is to select all statuses, and since this one is just in preliminary status, you'll click that. You'll click all projects to make sure that you capture everything that you're entering, and then you'll want to select this final button, the Summary, Narrative, and Detail button, which is the full scope of reports that we publish. And then you click Generate Reports, and what will happen is you'll see a PDF of your report appear. And that will give you the chance to see exactly what it will look like when it gets published. Assuming everything looks great, what you can then do is go back into each of your requests and click that second click to get it into the final submitted status, and then you know you're good to go. If there's something about the report that just doesn't look quite right, if the formatting is a bit wonky, as long as you're in the preliminary status, you'll still be able to go back in and make edits. So I think it's going to be helpful to take a look at how your report displays prior to getting in final submitted status. That'll just help streamline everything if you can take care of any weird issues that might be happening if things don't look the way you expect. And that is not uncommon, particularly if you've got several folks working on a request, and if maybe you've got different people operating Word documents that all get consolidated into one thing. It's pretty common for there to be some sort of weird formatting issue that happens once you compile everyone's stuff into the one request in CBS. So that's it for what I am going to cover. I think what I'd like to do is to just open it up to questions for those of you who've got questions. It looks like we do have a couple here. So the first question we have is about on that upload document screen, there are a couple of other options that you're going to see. So specifically the agency profile and the strategic plan. These are not documents that local governments need to submit. However, you're going to see these screens because state agencies also see these screens, and everybody uses the same system. So agencies do have to submit a profile, and they do have to submit a strategic planning summary. That is not anything that you, as local government officials, need to provide with your application. The only file that you have to upload is a resolution of support. And of course, there is the option to upload other documents. Not required, but can sometimes be helpful, particularly if you've got a site that, if there's not a site visit scheduled over the summer to see your project, we try to get to as many places as we can. But if it's not possible to actually see something in person, uploading some photos can be really helpful. These are not fields that you need to worry about, just the resolution of support, and to the extent that you'd like, you can utilize the other documents function. Another question, if you're doing a construction project that requires pre-design, does that have to be completed before you submit it? Yes, we do need to have pre-design completed before and pre-design needs to be approved by the Department of Administration before the subsequent phases of your project begin. So that relates to one of these statutory requirements. I think we had to have this this opened, or we happened to open up this particular link. So the way that this works is if you do have a construction project, which is what subdivision 1 of this particular statute gets at, if you've got a construction project, what 16B.335 tells us is that if you're asking for construction or major remodeling, you're going to have to prepare a pre-design package and submit it to the Commissioner of Administration. There is a pre-design manual available through the Department of Administration. You can navigate to it through that frequently asked questions section of our website. I can pull up here. You can find it by going to which state agencies will I need to work with. And here in the Department of Administration section, you can find a link to the pre-design manual, and you can also reach out to Gordon Christopherson, who is a great resource on specifically the pre-design component of your projects. Another question, what web browser do you need to use? Great question. The Capital Budget System is compatible with Google Chrome and Internet Explorer 11. So if you've got other editions of IE, or if you're a Firefox user, unfortunately, you're going to have some problems if you try to access the Capital Budget System. So make sure you're using Chrome or Internet Explorer 11. Another question we got on the topic of pre-design. So the pre-design requirement and the review by the Department of Administration applies when an agency or a local unit of government is seeking funding for construction or major remodeling. So at that point, you need to make sure that your pre-design for that particular facility has been reviewed and approved by the Department of Administration. Another question about project costs. Does project cost information have to be completed for each request? Yes, it does. The level of detail is really dependent on the nature of your project. If it is a lower dollar project amount, it's possible to just complete an abbreviated project cost form, but for requests of $5 million or more, that's really the point that you need to get into this more detailed dive into the project costs. So this is a screen that you'll need to complete for each of your requests. And again, if there's a category that you're not seeking funding for, you would not need to complete it. And one other thing that is probably helpful, I know several of you are working on projects that are going to play out over several years. Maybe you're working on phase 2 of a project and you receive funding in the 2014 bonding bill, for example. So what you'd want to do is on both the project costs and the funding sources screen, if you've got money that you've already received from phase 1, you'd note that in the prior year fields for both the project costs and the funding sources screens. When you're seeking just the request for a phase 2 of a project, you would enter those amounts in the 2018 or possibly 2020 and 2022 fields. And it looks like that's all the questions we've got so far. I'm not sure if folks have anything else. Feel free, to ask questions both about the system and application requirements. I know in the last week or so we've been getting lots of questions about if my project gets enacted in a bonding bill, how do I get my money? What does it mean that I have to work with a state agency and be a grantee? What does it mean for private use in my facility? So if there's anything like that, Trudy Halla is an excellent resource in that particular area. So it looks like we have another question, and this probably gets to when I was noting on the funding sources. referencing a 50% non-state match. So there's a question of what does it mean for my request if I'm not bringing that 50% match to the table? And that certainly does not preclude you from making a request. There are plenty of projects that are funded without the 50% non-state match. It's possible that you may be required by the legislature to put some money toward a project, and it may be less than 50%. In other cases, local governments do not have a local contribution. If you look through the 2017 bonding bill, you'll see projects that fall into really all categories. There are some projects that need to meet that 50% match. There are other projects where the state share is less than 50%, and there are several other funding sources that come into play to provide more than 50%, and there are some projects that have less than 50% or no non-state match at all. So the short answer is no, your request does not get denied automatically if you're not meeting that 50% match, but it certainly helps to be able to show the local share of a project. So I'm not sure if anybody else has questions. We'll keep the webinar open as long as there are. Oh, it looks like another one has come through. So the question really gets to that pre-design issue. At what point in the process of a project does pre-design need to be approved by administration? So before construction and major remodeling can begin, the pre-design would need to be approved. I would encourage you to contact Department of Administration, Gordon Christopherson in particular, to really understand what he's looking for and the timeline that he is on and the turnaround time necessary for approval. But really, the short answer to the question is that before you start on a construction project, before state bond money supports construction, that pre-design needs to be approved by admin. Another question about the deadline for submission. Great question. So if the deadline for submission is Friday, June 16th, what's the cutoff time? So actually, and I'm going to be sending out an email with this information as well, the system will remain open until 9 a.m. on Monday, June 19th. So for those of you who are last-minute crammers, you'll have through the weekend to put the finishing touches on your request. If things are not coming together by Friday, just know that it may be tough to get questions answered over the weekend. I know several of us who typically help troubleshoot questions are not going to be available on Friday and over the weekend very much, which is why we're giving a bit of extra time into Monday morning. So hopefully you've been able to get a good jump start on what you're entering in the system. You don't need until 9 a.m. on Monday, but that is the point at which the system would be closed to changes. And then I would also just say, so the preliminary requests get published on July 17th. And at that point, if there are changes to your request, if you realize that you've got another project that you want to add, if you're making any modifications to your request, you'll be able to get back into the system if you notify MMB that you need system access, and we'll be able to make that happen. We're not just going to let everyone back in the system. It's just helpful to be able to have that snapshot. But if you do need to make changes to your request, you'll be able to do that after July 17th. is there a dollar amount for a pre-design approval? Let's see. For local governments, if your construction project cost, if your total project cost is less than $1.5 million, you'd be exempt from that requirement. But if it's anything more than that, you would need to go through admin for pre-design approval for your construction project. And this question, since it sounds like there's a lot of questions about pre-design, I just suggest that if you Google MN Revisor, that'll bring up the Minnesota Revisor's website, and there is a function where you can just easily pull up statutes. So even if you're not in the capital budget system, then you can click on this link. The pre-design statute and that requirement that admin do review is 16B.335. So just take a look at that, and hopefully reading through that statute answers some of your questions. But of course, if anything is still a little bit murky, I'm happy to help navigate through that. And I know Gordon at admin is also a great resource. A recording of the webinar, yes, and I meant to mention that at the beginning. There will be a recording of the webinar available. Unfortunately, I don't know how quickly that will happen, but yes, we'll put it up on MMB's YouTube channel. I'll send out an email where that's located, so you can go back through if there's something that came up that you want to go back and listen to again. You'll be able to do that. So that's it for the questions that we've gotten so far. I'm not sure if anybody else is mulling anything over. Feel free to use that chat function in WebEx. Another question has come up about project costs. For the project cost direction, do you get the cost detail form after you answer those 3 questions? Yes, depending on your answers to those 3 questions, that's when you'll actually see that series of fields to complete in project costs. So you'll be asked if you're applying, if you're requesting funding for a grant program, if your request is more than $5 million or less than $5 million, and if you'd just like to fill out the project cost detail. If you have a lower dollar project amount, you're not required to do this, but it can be really helpful to see a more detailed look at your project costs. But after you answer those 3 questions, that's what will drive you to this form. So you don't see that until you go through those 3 questions. Once you've answered those 3 questions, you've kind of locked yourself into either the detailed form or the abbreviated form. So be sure that you're thoughtful about how you answer those so that you're working with the right level of detail in your project costs. For those of you who are not participating in WebEx but you're listening on the call, feel free to send me an email with your questions as well. My address is elizabeth.connor, and that's with an O-R, at state.mn.us. Well, we haven't gotten any further questions, so we'll stay in the meeting. So if anything pops up, feel free to send a message through the chat function or send me an email. Otherwise, feel free to take a listen to the meeting later. We'll send out a link to the YouTube channel that will have a recording of the meeting, but I appreciate everybody taking the time to listen and to learn more about the process and to get all questions answered before the deadline. It's easier to deal with it before rather than after the deadline. Let's see. not seeing it. Sorry, bear with me. I might have gotten an email, but for some reason it's not. Not seeing it. Question about the project cost direction. If there's a preference, I assume, is there a preference for whether or not we see that detailed cost form for statewide and regional programs? If you're requesting funding through, if you've got like a local road project that you might also be able to request funding through MnDOT's local road improvement program, you do not need to fill out the detailed cost form for a request like that. Chances are for local government, it's going to be the amount of your project that really triggers whether you need to fill out the more detailed form or the abbreviated form. Let's see. So a question came up about the resolution of support. If that resolution of support needs to be emailed to me if it's after the deadline. So if you can upload your resolution of support before 9 a.m. next Monday, you should be good to go in answering yes to that question about the resolution of support for your projects in the statutory requirements screen. If you're not going to make that Monday at 9 a.m. cutoff point, you should check no on the statutory requirements, email me that resolution, and my email address again is elizabeth.connor, C-O-N-N-O-R, @state.mn.us. And you can also, if you've been directing any correspondence to MMB's budget and finance mailbox, feel free to send it there if that's easier. Either way, I will be able to get it. But if you're not going to make that Monday at 9 a.m. cutoff, please just email that resolution to me, and I will attach it in the system, and I can change your answer to the statutory requirements question so that everything displays correctly in the July publication. Sorry, I think I misunderstood the question about the statewide and regional projects. So and this may be more of a strategic question, are statewide and regional projects more competitive? So I guess the first thing I would say about a project like a local road project or a state trails project where there are statutory programs that exist to fund those projects, we tell local governments that if your project meets the criteria for something like the local road improvement program or the local bridge replacement program, that you should be applying through the agency directly and not through the capital budget process. If there's something about your request that doesn't meet all of the requirements in those statutory programs, for example, if there is something that you need to spend money on, like right-of-way acquisition, for example, I don't believe is covered in the local road improvement grant program that MnDOT operates. But if that's something that's critical to your request and you need state funding for that, you should not apply through MnDOT, but you should apply through MMB's capital budget process. If there are projects that come to us as standalone requests that can fit into a statutory program, a grant program operated by a state agency, I think, to be really frank, I think that it's harder then to get your project funded through MMB's process if it's something that really is a better fit through an existing statutory grant program. So while it can be tempting to advance a request through MMB's process, if it's something that meets all the requirements of a statutory program and can be funded that way, we would direct you to the state agency application process for those grants. But definitely, if you're kind of on the fence about whether or not your project is a good fit in one lane or the other, give me a call or send me an email, and we can coordinate with the agency that operates the grant program to figure out what's the best course of action for your project. One question that came up about contact information and changes with usernames. If there is something that changed, whether you've inherited a capital budget task from a predecessor or if your email address has changed, unfortunately there's nothing in the system that allows you to make those sorts of updates. You're going to need to just contact me directly to let me know if we've got to update an email address for you or if we need to add additional users and take users who are no longer using the system out of the system. Unfortunately, there's not a system mechanism to do that, so please just contact me directly with any of those sorts of changes. We've got a couple other email questions. So again, about the resolution of support, it's perfectly acceptable if it comes in after the deadline. Again, just if you don't have that resolution in hand by the deadline, you'll just need to check no to the statutory requirement. Email it to me if you are not able to upload it in the system because you don't have it until after our cutoff, and I will be able to attach it in the system and make the changes to your statutory requirements answers. The other part of this question really gets to what do we need to see in those resolutions of support to know if you've met that test. And so there's actually in the statutory requirements screen, I wonder if I've now timed out of the system. If I go to statutory requirements, let me pick a project. So if we go into the statutory requirements screen, the specific statute, there's a state statute that governs the resolution of support, and of course now I'm not. I'll send out a link to the specific statute that speaks to what we need to see in the resolution of support from your local government. In short, we don't have a set template for what that needs to look like. It's really up to the local jurisdiction and the typical conventions that you've got for completing, for providing official documentation of support. The real critical piece is that if you've got more than one request, that there is an indication of the order of priority of those requests. We need to see not just the name of the project, but the specific bondable activities. So what types of expenditures will you be incurring with state bond funds? What sort of public purpose would be carried out with the project that you're seeking funding for? So regardless of how that takes place, if the minutes from the county board include that, and those are final approved minutes that get approved at a subsequent meeting, that would meet the test. If there is a formal document that is a standalone resolution, if that's the convention of your local government, that's just fine too. So really it's about what's in it and not necessarily the format. But I'll send the specific statute that speaks to what we need to see in those resolutions. Let's see, there's a question about bonding tours, those site visits that I mentioned. So there's a question about who do you work with to make sure that your project gets seen? And I think the first thing I'll say is that there are lots of different folks involved in the bonding tour process, and everybody's got a slightly different lens. So Minnesota Management and Budget conducts bonding tours. The House and the Senate, legislators and capital investment staff conduct bonding tours. The governor's office, the governor, the lieutenant governor conduct bonding tours. And unfortunately, we don't coordinate our efforts always. So it is possible that you might have more than one visit. It's possible that you'll have one visit. It's possible you'll have no visits. Unfortunately, there is no way to guarantee that your project gets seen, but the specific question that came here was on legislative bonding tours, how that works. So my understanding from talking to the capital investment staff in the legislature is that their bonding tours are very much informed by what gets published in July. So if you can get your request in by the deadline and it's published in July, that's what the legislature looks at to determine what are the requests that are out there, what are the urgent needs, and then they map out a schedule. It can always help. I'm not really in a position to inform anyone's legislative strategy, but I think it's safe to say that it always is important to be in touch with your local legislators, talking to the governor's office, highlighting why your project is really regionally significant and the difference that it will make for people. That's really, I think, the most effective way, besides just making the deadline and laying out a really compelling case for why the project is important and why it's important to fund it now. In addition to that, reaching out to your local legislator is a helpful strategy in making sure that things get elevated so that you have the best chance at making sure that your project is a stop on the bonding tours for legislators. There's always a lot more appetite, I will say, for bonding than there are dollars to go around. So the more you can highlight your project, the more successful you'll be. Typically, we get $3 to $4 billion worth of projects requested, and a typical bonding bill is usually in the neighborhood of $1 billion or less. So funding is very competitive, so the more you can do to really highlight why your project is important and urgent and the difference that it will make in terms of it being a public asset can go a long way to really helping your project stand out. That's it for questions that we've gotten. We've got about 5 minutes left. If there's anything that hasn't been addressed yet, feel free to chat it in WebEx or shoot me an email. Well, it looks like that might be it for questions. Joseph and I will stay in the meeting for a few more minutes in case anything comes in the last few moments we have. Hopefully this has addressed a lot of the questions that have been in your mind as you've been working on requests for the last several weeks or months or possibly years, depending on the type of project you've got. If you think of things after the webinar is over, feel free to shoot me an email. I can send out a quick recap of what the question is and what the answer is so that others can benefit from that information. Again, I really appreciate everybody taking time today to participate, and look out for an email from me both with just a general reminder about what's due and when it's due. I'll be sure to pull out that statutory reference that speaks to what your resolution of support needs to contain, and how you package that is really up to you. But hopefully this has answered the questions that you've had, and if anything comes up after, feel free to send an email or give me a phone call, and I'll do my best to answer. Thanks, everybody.